So, welcome back to part 2 of our class. In this part 2, we are going to create the mean form like we said. So, we cut out all the parts of the tape that we don't need, cut the tape along the center lines, and then peel it off. And then lie it flat on a flat piece of paper. In laying it on a flat piece of paper, we must take care to run our hands first along that center area. And then you would also find that the tip and the heel areas might pose some trouble in lying flat. So it's acceptable to just cut it with scissors, just give it a few notches with scissors. And then as much as possible, lie it flat without having so many wrinkles. We do the same for the side B, the inside part or the medial side. Then we'll also do the same thing, run our hands along the center, cut a few notches at the heel and the tip, and then use our ruler to, as much as possible, lie it flat on a piece of paper without stretching the sellotape that much. So, having done that, we'll mark out all of those points that we identified earlier, the counterpoint and the back height, the instep, and the tongue point. This, of course, is the vamp point. So we'll lie all of that straight. The next thing is we are going to cut these things that we have flattened out on a flat piece of paper are called last copies. So we are going to cut them out of the cardboard so that they are independent copies of themselves lying away from the broader cardboard. So let's mark this A, the outside part, and mark the inside part B. Then all of those points we identified earlier on side B, we'll cut notches on them. So we cut notch at the vamp point, at the tongue point as well. Just cut those notches so that when we flip it, when we flip it over, we would have notches that we can mark in to identify them. Then we will just trace out that side B flipped over on a piece of paper. And then taking side A, we will put the heel of side A on the heel of side B and the tip of side A on the tip of side B. Holding it together, we would also trace on side A. Now I want you to take note of the vamp line on both side A and B. At the end of the vamp line, they do not align together. There's a difference between side A and B. While at the vamp point, they essentially align on a straight line. We will factor that in doing the vamp line for our mean form. So that is the mark made by side B, and that's the mark made by side A. The difference between the two of them, we will divide into two at the top area. At the bottom area, which is called the feather edge, we will just take the longer of the two lines. For the most part, it is side A, but you'll notice that around the heel area, side B also is longer. So we will take that line. So we will cut along that middle division that we did. And then, like we said, we will take the longer of the two lines for the feather edge area. And then we'll also cut the division at the back area. This thing that we have cut out is known as the mean form. It is a compensation for any shortfalls we may have on side A, and then a reduction for any excesses that we may have on side B or vice versa. Now that issue we noticed about our vamp line, let's factor that in. So we place our side B and mark in the end of its vamp line. So if we draw from the vamp point, to the end of side A, vamp line, side B vamp line, and draw from the vamp point to the end of side A's vamp line. We'll find the middle between the two of them and draw from the vamp point to that middle point. That middle line now becomes our new vamp line. Now let's measure the standard last length of our mean form. We find that it corresponds with the original standard last length, mostly, of our last. While our last was 26 cm, our mean form has a standard last length of 25.5 cm, just a shortfall of 0.5 cm, which is acceptable. So we'll trace out our mean form now, and then all of the formulas that we use in creating our original design, we are going to create on this mean form. So let's start first of all by dividing our vamp line into two. So we divide that into two. Then our standard last length is 25.5. If we divide by 5, that will give us 5.25, which is the measurement of our counterpoint. If we add 1 cm to that, we'll get our back height. Then we will draw a line from our counterpoint to the middle of our vamp line, draw a line from our back height to the middle of our vamp line. Then we'll find our instep. We said our instep is our standard last length divided by 4. And that's 6.375. So we measure that out. 6.375, almost 6.4. That's our instep. And then we said we will start drawing in the tongue of our loafers 2 cm beneath that instep. So we mark that 2 cm point. We measure 90 degrees from that point going downwards. And then we say the width of our tongue is our standard last length divided by 8, which gives us about 7.18 or 7.2. We mark that in. And then we measure half a centimeter beneath the middle of our vamp line and draw a line joining the width of our tongue to there. 1 cm up, 1 cm down, we have a place to mark in our curves. And the pattern of our loafers is ready. Way. So let me trace that out by pen. So you can see that if we curve that in, the basic pattern of our loafers is ready. So you would ask, if this was possible, why didn't we just create a mean form and start designing our design on paper? Like I said before, we needed to see that it looks good on the last first, and then knowing that now, we can go ahead and just use our mean form for any other design that we want. What I'm doing here is I'm adding a lasting allowance. This is the allowance for leather that will go underneath the last when we are lasting this shoe. So I'll draw a line from the vamp point to the tip, a line from the vamp point to the instep going upward as well. Then I'll cut along those lines and also cut along that other line. Then we'll just cut out the design that we have on this our mean form, and then along the lasting allowance as well. Now, just so that this shoe is going to be very tight on the last, very tight and snug, there's something that I need to show you, a trick. But first of all, let's clean out all the lines on this design that we do not require. So to make sure that your pattern is tight on your last, it's usually okay to draw in half a centimeter in front of the back height and half a centimeter at the end of the lasting allowance. That way, when you are lasting, and then curve it in through the counterpoint. So we'll just cut away just that slight bit of pattern there, so that basically your pattern hugs quite snugly on your last. Then we're going to do a thing called springing of the vamp. That curve there at the vamp point, we don't want it. We want to straighten it out. So we mark about 2 cm on top and beneath the middle of our vamp point. Cut those open such that the entire pattern is not completely torn into two, but it can rotate along that axis. And then rotate it until it lies, the whole pattern lies on a straight line like so. Then we'll secure that with masking tape. Just secure it firmly in place. And then you see that the entire vamp is now on a straight line. So with this, we will just proceed to cutting out the complete master pattern of our loafers. First of all, we'll cut tracing channels, just cut holes at several places along the design lines. Then also along the lasting allowance. For these ones, I'll just cut them open so you can see. These are basically tracing channels where we can put in our pen and mark on leather. I'll flip the entire pattern over and use a pen just to enlarge the tracing channels. So those earlier lines that I cut earlier, razor marks that I made, I'll just use a pen to enlarge them so that my pen can enter in and trace. Then let's go ahead and trace the main body of our loafers, the upper pattern. So we place it on a piece of paper. If I had big enough sheet of cardboard, you can just flip it into two and do this only once. But my cardboard is A4, it isn't big enough, so I'll just have to do it, duplicate the pattern, and then glue it together using a tape. So this is 1/2 of the pattern. I'll use a ruler to straighten out that line over there. So I'll simply cut this out and then duplicate it and secure it using some tape. So let's just go ahead and cut this out. So I place that on another paper like so. Trace the alternate or the second part of the entire pattern. Flip it over and then secure with tape. So now this is the entire upper pattern. Just one last securing with tape, and then also cut in the lasting allowance channels. So just a quick text to see that it looks good. I think it does. It has no options. So I think for this one, our upper pattern is ready. Now let's go ahead and make the lining pattern. What I typically do is I divide the top line into 3 and mark from the back, and then add 1 or 1.5 cm at the feather edge, and then also draw a straight line from there. Then mark a tracing channel over there and use that as the back part of my lining. So the front part of my lining, I will trace out like so. Now for this lining, I'm going to add 1 cm allowances all around it. The one on this side is a stitching allowance, while the ones all around the rest of it is just to give myself some room for error when I am attaching the upper to the lining. You will see how this plays out by the time we are coupling in our leather pieces. So let me go ahead and duplicate the front part of the lining pattern. So duplicate that and cut it out. Let's cut away all the extras, wastes that we do not need. Cut in the lasting allowance, the stitching allowance. Then we also said we left 1 cm spaces all around the pattern to give ourselves some wiggle room of error when we are attaching the upper to the lasting. It will be clearer by the time we are attaching the upper to the lining. So here is the front part of our lining with all of the excess allowances factored in. Now let's do the back part of the lining. So we place the back height on the straight line of the cardboard. It's okay if it pushes out a little bit, just about 2 cm outward. That's perfectly fine. The stretch in your leather can accommodate it. Then we draw it in, draw the line in, add the lasting allowance, and then that 1 cm on top as well, we also add that. Cutting our tracing channels, and then we have the back part of our lining pattern. So if we place the lining, you see that is our lining pattern, and that is our upper pattern on top of our lining pattern. So thank you.